So I thought this was important to read. This was back in 1722, and I'm not going to say who it is until I finish it, because it was written under a pen name. It's from foundersarchive.gov. Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man as far as by it he knows not hurt or control the right of another. And this is the only check it ought to suffer, and the only bounds it ought to know. This sacred privilege is so essential to free governments that the security of property and the freedom of speech always go together. And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech, a thing terrible to public traitors. This secret was so well known to the court of King Charles I that his wicked ministry procured a proclamation to forbid people to talk of parliaments, which those traitors had laid aside. Legal prerogative was called disaffection, and punished as sedition. Nay, people were forbid to talk of religion in their families, for the priests had combined, and he means Rome, and the priests had combined with the ministers to cook up tyranny and suppress truth and the law, while the late King James, when the Duke of York went avowedly to Mass. Men were fined, imprisoned, and undone for saying he was a papist, and that King Charles II might live more securely a papist, there was an act of Parliament made declaring it treason to say that he was one. That men ought to speak well of their governors is true, while their governors deserve to be well spoken of, but to do public mischief without hearing of it is only the prerogative and felicity of tyranny. A free people will be shewing that they are so by their freedom of speech. The administration of government is nothing else but the attendance of the trustees of the people upon the interest and affairs of the people. And as it is the part and business of the people, for whose sake alone all public matters are, or ought to be transacted, to see whether they be well or ill transacted. So it is in the interest and ought to be the ambition of all honest magistrates, which just means your elected officials, and judges, all your honest magistrates, to have their deeds openly examined and publicly scanned. Only the wicked governors of men dread what is said to them, or of them. The public censure was true, else he had not felt it bitter. Freedom of speech is ever the symptom, as well as the effect of a good government. In old Rome, all was left to the judgment and pleasure of the people, who examined the public proceedings with such discretion and censured those who administered them with such equity and mildness, that in the space of 300 years not 5 public ministers suffered unjustly. Indeed, whenever the commons proceed to violence, the great ones had been the aggressors. Guilt only dreads liberty of speech, which drags it out of its lurking holes and exposes its deformities and horrors to the daylight. Cincinnatus and other virtuous and undesigning magistrates of the Roman Commonwealth had nothing to fear from the liberty of speech. Their virtuous administration, the more it was examined, the more it brightened and gained by inquiry. But things afterwards took another turn. Rome, with the loss of its liberties, lost also its freedom of speech. Then men's words began to be feared and watched, and then first began the poisonous race of informers, banished indeed under the righteous administration of Titus. Going back to the Roman days. The best princes have ever encouraged and promoted freedom of speech. They know that upright measures would defend themselves and that all upright men would defend them. Tacitus, speaking of the reign of some of the princes above mentioned, says with a blessed time, it's in Latin, so I think it means a blessed time when you might think what you would, and speak what you thought. I doubt not, but old Spencer and his son, who were the chief ministers and betrayers of Edward II, would have been very glad to have stopped the mouths of all honest men in England. They dreaded to be called traitors because they were traitors, and I dare say Queen Elizabeth's Walsingham, who deserved no reproaches, feared none. Misrepresentations of public measures is easily overthrown by representing public measures truly. When they are honest, they ought to be publicly known, that they may be publicly commended. But if they are knavish or pernicious, they ought to be publicly exposed in order to publicly be detested. Yours truly, Silence Dogood. Miss Silence Dogood was the pen name used by Benjamin Franklin to get his work published in the New England paper, a newspaper founded and published by his brother James Franklin. This was after Benjamin Franklin was denied several times when he tried to publish letters under his own name. Yeah, there's several different letters he wrote under that pen name. So I think that all of that is true about freedom of speech. And I think all of these people that want to use security reasons as a reason to ban TikTok, that's not a reason to disrupt our Constitution. So it's really obvious to me when I'm starting to agree with AOC on this, that because she's right, actually, she's right. There's other way. I listened to part of what, and I agree with nothing that she says. I stand in nothing that she agrees with except this. Is there not other ways for you to deal with this? Now, obviously, really what Congress and the House are trying to do is pass down the Patriot Act on steroids, and they're using TikTok to do it. But they've all violated the Constitution. It was a violation of the Constitution to institute the Patriot Act under "we need to keep you safe." And all of our founders knew it. And I support no one that's going to let security reasons be a reason that you are going to stop people from speaking up. Because you will get god-awful men like in your Roman Empire up to today that will then use those reasons, use infiltrated agencies to take those rights away from you. So do you want to live in a free world where maybe you're not or a free country where maybe it's not as safe? Or do you want to live in such safety that you have no free speech? I think the answer is obvious.